Hi everyone, we're back for another video. This is following right after the recent event that ended in Singapore, the first major event of the year, the OCG 3-on-3 team tournament. So I participated with a couple of friends and we did quite well, better than expected. So I figured might as well do a after event report of sorts. Now this isn't a full deep dive into the deck we used or anything, but I figured it'd be interesting to take a look at what are some considerations that went into the decks for this 3v3. So on screen right now are the decks that me and my teammates used. I use Kewl Tunes or Kewl Tunes in the TCG. My teammate used Mermail Atlantean and Lunar Lights. So we tried to split our hand traps and staples as much as we could, which sort of led to me picking this deck. I'll explain in a bit. So Kewl Tunes, if you're not familiar, was a deck that was released in the deck build pack Phantom Revengers, and the entire gimmick is summoning synchro tuners, or summoning tuners in general, and even their synchros are tuners, and you can just make them with any number of tuners. You don't even have to use non-tuners. Now, one thing you'll immediately notice from looking at my deck is that I'm not running any of the usual draw power cards. So no Maxi, no Purulia, no Fualos. My only Mauchami being this thing. And Meows is okay, but even in the tournament itself, it didn't really do much. Against Elven Notes, or Elf Notes, I think they're called, and Mitsurugi, they are okay. You'll get a good few draws off of them sometimes. But against most of the matches, it didn't really work out. But before I go any further into that, let's take a look at the matchups. So these are my matchups for the day. By way of a twist of fate, you could call it, we kind of had to face the exact same team for the last 3 rounds, and we kind of lost overall 2-1. So there's that. But actually, for the last 3 rounds, when I fought against Onomato Tellarknight, one thing that did come up was the hand trap issue did sort of come and bite me a bit, because for one, if you don't stop their combo all the way, they just sort of skip your turn and then they OTK you from there. So you kind of need some really good hand traps to stop them. It's not about having board breakers per se, it's just having the right hand traps. And at quite a few times, I didn't really have the right hand trap to cover this. Do bear in mind that this is just within a week of the release of the new set Blazing Dominion. So a lot of things were still in the experimental stages. But one of the biggest buffs to Kewl Tunes outside of their own archetypal support is this, Fredalis Harmonia. So this being a hand trap, a tuner, and a dragon, because Tenpai really likes that, is that it's if you pair with the right cards, it's a double disruption. So the most common ones being Malong, but honestly you could also use Packbit, although Packbit needs you to commit another card in the hand, so that's not really ideal. The idea behind all of this is that I figured I'd be fine with less disruptive hand traps because I had Harmonia, which was true to an extent. Fighting against stuff like Blue Eyes, which prevents targeting with True Light in the first round, for example, Harmonia was particularly useful actually, because its first effect to destroy something is non-targeting, so it just kind of bypasses True Light protection. Then after that, Malong can just remove True Light or anything else on the field that you find is a problem. But in general, I've not had to use Packbit as much, mainly because I didn't want to discard my hand going second. There are very rare instances where you will use this going first, unless it's against another Kewl Tunes maybe. But overall, very strong buff. But it's not just this. So this, in conjunction with their newer support, Rotary, it's actually a lot more significant than I was expecting, because at first I thought it'd be nice to have an additional back row search. Maybe you could add Synchro, Kewl Tune Synchro I mean, to your hand with this, and that'd be nice. But the ability to look at your opponent's hand before making that addition is a very good call, because Kewl Tunes or Kewl Tunes have traditionally had this issue where if you were to start with, let's say, Reco, for example, even if you search Rotary with it and attempt to make Trackmaker, you run the risk of dying to Droll. And because of that, having the ability to see your opponent's hand beforehand is a really helpful thing to have. So one of the things that I had to proactively do during this entire event, out of fear of Droll, was to normal summon Q, and instead of summoning something else that searches, I just immediately summon Rotary. They immediately make Trackmaker with this. The main bonus of this is, by the time you search the 2 cards using Trackmaker and Rotary, you have looked at your opponent's hand beforehand. So if they have Droll, you can just search, I guess, double Kewl Tune Synchro, for example, or something that you can use it to set up for your next turn. So because you know that they are going to hit Droll anyway, so you can just plan around that. Or conversely speaking, if they have Nibiru and you usually don't have an out to that on your first turn, you can just set up with the bare minimum number of summons and pass the turn. It's quite stable in general, the deck, if you just end the board on Remix and Trackmaker. Okay, I realize I said that it's not really going to be an in-depth look at the deck, but I'm explaining the decks. But just wanted to cover some of the new support that this deck has gotten that has made it a lot better to play. So that was Rotary, that was Harmonia. But another thing I wanted to note about this interaction was that it made it a lot easier to summon something like Visas. Now, the reason why I had this counter trap in my deck for Visas is just because you can search it with it this way. You can use Rotary and Harmonia to make it, and then you can search the counter trap. It just gives you more protection going first, which is quite good to have because a lot of Kewl Tune or Kewl Tune disruption is targeting. Usually it's regarding to stuff on the field, and even when they can, chain stuff with Zaren, they don't always make it right off the bat. So having the option to just have an Omni Negate as a counter trap is always nice to have. And it's not just that. So along with these two good cards from the newer set, they also gave us Solemn Report. Now, Solemn Report, like every other summon card, is not once per turn, which, make of that what you will. And it being able to stop any spell trap is always nice. This thing against Sky Strikers, against Mitsurugi, it can either stall them really hard for the turn or just outright win you the game. That's always nice. Now, going back to the deck build and some of the considerations, one thing I did notice when I played this deck is that it really seldom breaks. I think I've only had one like really break hand. I think that was in my final game against Onomato Tellarknight, where I didn't have a single starter and it was very hard for me to make plays with it. But in general, with all the new support in, you can just, your one card starters, it essentially comes down to this. You have 3, and then, Rotary plus any of them gives you an additional normal summon. You add in the field spell, and you essentially have 3 normal summons in a turn. So you're never really stuck in that regard. Clip with any of the regular 3-star hand traps is also in immediate synchro. Any level 2 also works, though you don't really have that many. Another thing is, I figured the reason why I could go without Maxi, I could go without Fuaros, I can go without Perulia, is because they can play 3 copies of Pot of Desires. So with Desires now recently unlimited in the OCG, being able to play 3 copies of it is actually a really strong addition to this deck. You play pretty much every Kewl Tunes monster at 3 copies anyway, so banishing the top 10 of your deck isn't really that big a deal. And the draw 2 really helps. And if you need additional protection, because I didn't run Call by the Grave or Cross Out, I also have Sales Ban. This is I couldn't run more copies of it, but if I could, I would have, because using this in addition to Rotary just means you can see what kind of hand traps they have in their hand that they haven't already activated, that you can just call that and just block them out of it for a turn, like for example Nibiru. Now for other stuff, Magnamut is an option that I think some Japanese lists have also run. It searches mainly Harmonia, which is always nice, but you can also use it as a synchro material if you really want in a pinch. That's where Packbait comes in. Some Japanese lists I've seen also run Cyframe Lord Omega, just because you can use Magnamut and any level 2 tuner to make a level 8 synchro. It's a more niche case, but I've not actually made Packbait with it, but having Magnamut search your Harmonia at the end of the turn is really helpful to have. Now, in addition to that, maybe I should explain some of the other choices which may not be that ideal in a no restrictions format. So outside of 3v3, this may not be really helpful. So one of it is the Alba's Quick Play, Fowler and the Virtuous. This thing was really there for coverage because it being 3v3, there are a lot of things you need to consider. Everybody's playing a bunch of different decks, and because of the way your staples are split, some people might be able to play some decks that don't work well in the current meta environment but work well in this format specifically, one of which is stun decks. So if your opponent plays a particularly annoying stun card, or for example like Clown Clan, they can play a bunch of floodgates, be it like Vanity's Ruler, Skill Drain, stuff like that. Being able to destroy those is very helpful to you, and it's not like the lock introduced by Harmonia, which prevents you from using anything special summon from the extra deck's effect for 2 turns until the end of your next turn, except for synchro monsters. It doesn't really hurt you because you can still send Albion to the graveyard and it works because it doesn't care about the graveyard. It only cares about stuff on the field that was summoned from the extra deck. So you don't really need to worry about sending Albion to the grave and then being able to set another Fallen next turn, or at the end of the turn, sorry. So it's just a coverage card. It's whether or not you want to run it in a proper build is entirely optional, I feel, but it's just good to have. Now on to the other options which may or may not be run. So Sphere Mode, personally I feel Sphere Mode is really good just because, like I mentioned before, with all the new support you have a total of up to like 3 normal summons in a turn, so using Sphere Mode just locks you out of 1. It's also the reason I have Gamma Seal for the same reason. It's really just to get rid of annoying cards. But the reason I put Gamma Seal at 1 and Sphere Mode at 1 when the original idea was to put Sphere Mode at 2 is because there was a possibility of running into stuff like Purely or Lunar Lights, which have a possibility of ending the turn on less than 3 monsters, and it's 1 or 2 towers. In the case of Purely, if they end on just 1 towers, you can just use Gamma Seal to get rid of it. That's fine. In the case of, say, Lunar Lights, for example, if they end on 2 bodies, you're not going to be able to use Sphere Mode anyway, so you just use Gamma Seal. And because of the effects of stuff like Trackmaker, you can just, in the graveyard, when it's used as synchro material, you can just bounce the Gamma Seal back to hand and get rid of the other towers that way. I split it 1-1, though in reality, if you're not playing in 3v3 shared ban list format, you probably don't need to run 1-1 at this awkward ratio. You could probably just go Sphere Mode all the way. The other card is Natural Rose Whip. This thing, I don't think I've seen it run in some Japanese lists. effects, but it's a very annoying card to deal with. So as long as it's on the field, your opponent can only activate one spell or trap per turn. You've probably seen this in older cards like Great Shogun Shien, for example. And do note that it says activate once per turn. So if you negate the activation, they can just simply do it again. But if you use it in conjunction with something like Kewl Tune's RS, where it just negates the card effect specifically, then they won't be able to activate another copy, and it's summonable by Q from the deck straight. So it's just an annoying card for your opponent to get rid of. Because when they play something like, for example, against Sky Striker, Mitsurugi, if their first opening back row is not to get rid of Rose Whip, then they're locked out of back row for the rest of the turn. So it's always good to have. Now back to the problem child I mentioned earlier, Meowth. Meowth has its use cases. Its best matchup will probably be against Malice, to be honest. I didn't run into any Malice, so this didn't really help as much. Its main uses were for Mitsurugi and Elf Node. I would like to say Elf Nodes don't really let you draw as much, but it's still a good deterrence to have. There was one game where against Elf Nodes where I drew two of this, one off of the first one's effect, and I just dropped both and he was forced to use Baron to negate it, so I couldn't just draw like 4 or something by the end of my turn. It's a fun interaction, but otherwise, the rest of the stuff are things that you were more likely to find in a regular, I would like to say regular Kewl Tune decks. So Ghost Mona, Ghost Ogre, Ghost Bell, Veiler. So their levels are all useful to have, and being tuners, they can also be used with your Kewl Tunes to synchro. The level 3s are of course obvious, and more recently, because of Radiant Typhoon, having access to Ghost Mona is always better than Veiler in some cases, because they will summon on your turn, and even against the Kewl Tunes mirror, if they just summon stuff on your turn, you can't Veiler, so you just have to use Ghost Mona and just target and go for that. So some of these things are like mix and match, but I believe even outside of a 3v3 format, some of these are very useful to have. So Ghost Bell, maybe Mona, you could treat it as a side deck option. Veiler is definitely good to have. Ghost Ogre is one of those cases where I figured I could probably use this mostly against Elf Nodes, not so much against other decks. I haven't really had much success with this against other decks, but against Elf Nodes, this is really good, especially when they use their spell card and they send something to the graveyard and they just destroy it and the whole effect just whiffs and they lose 2. That's always good. So these are some things that you can also consider if you want to play Kewl Tunes in real life. Again, because it's so recent after the set was released, we don't really have much experience playing against the newer decks, so some of these things could change down the road, but overall, I think this is a really fun deck to try out, to experiment with. If you've played Yummy before, I feel like the overall flow and mindset you have going into the game, using your synchros to set up for the next turn where you do a bunch of different things to disrupt your opponent. I think if you have experience with Yummy, this might be slightly easier to get used to. But yeah, I'm looking forward to see how this deck progresses as the meta develops and how, you know, Blazing Dominion will sort of change the meta going forward, because there are some really good high value cards this set. And of course, looking forward to what the end of February will bring with the Limit Over Heroes collection. Having overframe cards was something I was looking forward to for many years, but thank God it's finally here. So hopefully we'll be able to make a video when that comes out as well. So please look forward to that. Alright, see you next time.